whoever you are, no matter the etiology of experience or genesis of glossolalia. Hello. Once upon a time, somebody said, quote, "Small minds discuss people, average minds discuss events, great minds discuss ideas." End quote. I have no idea who said this first. It's been attributed to many thinkers, but I first encountered this sentiment when I was a student. At that time, I was renting a room that many students had rented before me, and it featured a wall covered in thoughts, musings, poetry, little doodles, anything that the previous occupant wanted to contribute. These little quotes and phrases were fascinating to read through, and at the time, I probably dismissed this particular one as somewhat pompous. But, clearly, it has stuck with me. I mean, if the quote was an idea worth discussing in itself, who was I to disagree with the great mind that suggested it? Whatever its origins, I can't deny that it has set the standard for many beer garden conversations that followed, and spawned a strange, jarring realization in me, which I will get to in the course of this podcast. But to fully explain what that realization was, there's a bit of groundwork to cover. So let's chew through this idea together, if only to help our minds feel great. It all began with the origin of consciousness, and by it I mean any thought that we're capable of entertaining. It is highly unlikely that conscious awareness just appeared on Earth one day fully formed. The chances are slim that some unconscious reptile or fish gave birth to conscious offspring, understandably surprised and confused. Instead, life's conscious awareness must have followed a smooth transition over millennia from earlier kinds of lived experience. The fully fledged introspective and autobiographical awareness that we have today must surely owe its existence to some cognitive precursors. You can't decorate a cake before you've baked it, so to speak. I hope it's not too shocking for me to suggest that a wide spectrum of senses and sensitivities exist in the natural world. Plants merely grow towards the light, whereas a hawk has incredibly detailed eyesight. The ability to sense and respond to your environment is a prerequisite of an emotional response. Feelings, experience, and sentience rely on more primitive sensory information, so conscious thought must have arrived much later to the party. I hope you're with me so far. I've heard consciousness described as originating from a kind of perceptual white noise, like the gradual tuning of a TV from static interference. This is pleasing to think about. It's a nice image, but it's probably inaccurate. So how might subjective experience realistically emerge from basic sensory input? Well, here's my current best guess, speaking as a total non-authority in any relevant field. It occurs to me that the most ancient animals on Earth, those without any brains at all, would still have to gather some sort of data to keep themselves alive. At a minimum, they'd have to monitor their own bodies for physical damage, a lack of oxygen, or any temperature extreme. An appropriate response relies on data being gathered in the first place. Taking note of one's bodily conditions doesn't need to be consciously felt. An electric kettle knows to switch off when the water reaches the right temperature without necessarily feeling anything. A kettle is not sentient in that respect. For simple organisms like bacteria or jellyfish, a basic stimulus-response feedback loop is all you need to navigate towards food or away from harmful environments. When a more advanced animal, like a mammal or a bird, feels something, let's say pain, that feeling still needs to be grounded in something physical. In these cases where a creature takes damage, automatic chemical systems will wave flags and sound alarms. And those chemical messages are the feeling that things aren't going so great. Both the internal physiological response and the feeling are the same thing, biologically speaking. When the environment pokes, internal chemistry flows, and the animal flinches and runs away. Obviously, this is a massive oversimplification, but the effect is sensational. Pardon the pun. Don't worry, this is not the deep philosophical revelation that I had at university. We'll get to that, I promise. Now, speaking as a blind, deaf, Precambrian blob, sensing the environment in order to move towards or away from something creates a catch-22. While I move, how can I distinguish changes in the environment from changes caused by my own actions? Did the poking stop because I moved, or did the pokey thing just go away on its own? Organisms as basic as bacteria can sense the world and respond to changes, though they'd be quick to admit bacterial responses are involuntary and inflexible. Plants, in contrast, are far more complex than that. Being multicellular, plants boast a rich sensitivity to damage, light direction and intensity, food availability, and airborne chemicals. Plants are really amazing, but they cannot move, at least not after a seed has taken root. As a kingdom, plants can be pretty sure that if something changes, it wasn't their fault. Sure, they can react, but not in ways that demand second-by-second updates. Bacteria, for all their relative simplicity, can move, but with such a limited repertoire of behaviours, there's no great risk of sensory confusion. Because they lack a wide variety of different adaptive behavioural responses, consciousness would be wasted on these life forms. So a creature's perceptions and actions must evolve together to grant any benefit. To drive this point home, consider Superman. Famously, Superman can move faster than a speeding bullet. But the ability to move this fast isn't very useful unless your visual processing is also running at the same speed. Otherwise, you wouldn't know to get out of the way when someone shot at you. Similarly, seeing things in bullet time, in slow motion, is no use at all if you lack superpowered muscles that can move you just as quickly. The result would be visual acuity that allows you to see bullets coming towards you and watch helplessly as they burrow into your body. For exactly these reasons, the abilities of life forms in the real world, including consciousness, have to develop in step. For any organism composed of lots of individual cells, chemical signals must be broadcast widely across the whole cooperating cellular clump, or body in the jargon. Organism-wide cell-to-cell chit-chat taught these multicellular individuals a couple of useful tricks. Firstly, cells that specialized in detecting could coordinate with cells for moving. Second, distant movement cells could synchronize their efforts, producing well-timed, powerful actions. But the larger the organism grows, the more difficult these communication issues become. Any lag between sense and response could spell death. So over time, new kinds of cells eventually emerged that were dedicated to passing messages throughout the larger organism. And just like that, over an eon or so, the nervous system was born. Again, I'm skipping a lot of details here because I don't have the lifespan, but you'll believe me when I say that with great new abilities come great new problems. What any animal will do next depends on what it senses now. This sensory motor arc, as it's called, can be finely tuned as it takes place within the body of the organism itself. What an animal will sense next depends on what it does now. The motor sensory arc extends out into the external world, necessarily incurring a relative loss of control. Sentience, some have argued, lies in the difference between these two streams of sensory experience. How things feel is affected by disharmony between the two departments of sensing and acting. Perhaps an example. Have you ever got sick on a rocking boat, or perhaps while reading in a car? Your sense of balance and motion actually come from systems in the ears. Feeling seasick while down in the cabin of a boat, or the nausea that comes from looking at your phone on a winding car journey, occurs when the ears are saying, "Hey, we're moving," and the eyes respond, no we're not. In our ancestral past, chemical disagreements like this between the senses were most likely due to food poisoning. As a sensible precautionary measure, the body would reflexively purge the stomach. Our technology has been developing far faster than our anatomy, it seems. Alright, so the more animals could do, the more valuable it became to get fast and accurate updates from the senses. The muscles of animals had to co-evolve not just with improved spatial awareness, but rapid information processing too. To help with this, nerve cells clustered around the sense organs, like traders at a stock market. And it's these dense congregations of neurons that gave rise to the first animal brains. That's all brains really are, bundles of neurons exchanging information. Still, somewhere along the way, animals had to exert some serious top-down control over their behaviours. To help identify which environmental changes were being caused by the organism's own actions, brains started using efference copies. This was a major cognitive milestone, and is going to take a little more explanation. Last week, the building where I work wanted to test its fire alarms. Fun fact. To avoid mass panic, an internal email went around explaining what was about to happen. In a joyfully similar way, brains can send duplicate messages both to the muscles and to the sensory neurons. This tells the muscles what to do and the senses what to expect. Whenever you take a step forwards, a copy of that instruction goes both to your leg muscles and to your eyes, or rather the relevant parts of the brain. This means that when the world shifts around you, you don't vomit everywhere. Almost as a side effect, these efference copies create a distinction between what is you, the extent of your body and its influence, and what is not you. Any animal that can move must be able to make this distinction, from fish to primates. But there's no need to share every bit of information with every part of the brain. An instruction to move doesn't necessarily need to go to the olfactory centres, for example. When it comes to efficient information processing, it definitely makes sense to assign different tasks to different parts of the brain. This is also true of people and their occupations. No single athlete can be expected to excel in every Olympic event. Keeping things separate allows for specialization, whether you're an athlete or a part of the brain. I was fascinated to learn during my degree that the brains of most animals aren't even wired to combine information from each eye. Think about that. Why would the brain have separate processing areas for images coming in from the left eye and those coming in from the right? What seems like an oversight allows each eye, and even different patches within each eye, to excel at detecting food or predators or mating displays. Compartmentalizing the visual field and dividing up the work makes for quicker and more accurate decisions. This is why pigeons will look left and right, turning their head, making sure to view novel objects with both parts of the brain to work out what it is. Suddenly, asking what another creature sees or feels is meaningless. Unless the organism can create a unified representation of its environment, the way humans can, blending all their senses together, what life feels like from the perspective of a bird or an amphibian may be literally inconceivable. And the felt experience of being a human will be drawing on cognitive tweaks that other animals simply don't possess. For example, I might imagine that putting my hands on some barbed wire is going to hurt a lot. That's usually enough to put me off doing so. If I were to puncture my body by grabbing a fistful of metal barbs, the subsequent pain sensation would likely remind me not to do that again. And any human spectator witnessing my stupidity could learn vicariously from my distress and not attempt the same thing themselves. In the case of less intelligent animals like fish, who can't so easily draw on inference and social learning, the immediate sense of pain may be all they have to guide their actions. For this reason, an argument could be made that simpler animals with more basic brains feel pain and hunger and misery to a far greater extent than humans are capable. This is all just speculation, of course, but it's something that few anglers will stop to consider. With any luck, right now you can't actually feel your kidneys or your liver. Many sensory arcs operate in silence as far as our experience is concerned. Your heart is constantly adjusting its pulse to keep up with energetic demands, but these things usually operate beyond our perception, at least until there's a problem. If there's no need to change internal or external conditions, conscious awareness offers no particular advantage. Our attention is quickly and inescapably hijacked, however, when we're shivering in the cold, holding our breath, or standing on a Lego brick with bare feet. In these situations, primordial emotions are invoked, ancient life-saving fight-or-flight responses that dominate all other perceptions and cannot be ignored. The same is true of our mental processes. We're often not aware that our brains are checking up on the body language of every stranger in a crowded room, until someone moves in an aggressive or threatening way, that is, and then our attention is commanded. These are ancient systems of self-preservation that our animal ancestors surely possessed, and animals have been feeling pain and fear for far longer than humans have existed. So what do we, Homo sapiens, get for lumping all of our senses together like the universal athletes we are? Well, it turns out oodles. Unlike birds and frogs and fish, combining information from all the senses to create a single coherent picture creates a virtual inner model of the world around us. This is not one impression after another, like a slideshow. It's more of a soupy mixture of sight, sound, touch, and smell, stirred by time itself to transform one moment into another, and giving us a deeper sense of where we are, how objects might be manipulated, and why we shouldn't grab barbed wire. As you might have guessed, this mental representation of reality is profoundly useful when trying new things, memorizing complicated procedures, or connecting events in time. For sure, the lives of most creatures are stressful enough without these extra steps, but living in two worlds simultaneously, the mental world and the real world, allows us to experiment. This may be a uniquely human superpower that we are going to demonstrate together right now. If you're not driving or putting on lipstick, try tilting your head to one side. Notice that the room stays still. You can thank efference copies for this perceived environmental stability. Now, try moving towards something that's making a noise. For science. You'll be able to tell that the thing isn't getting louder, you're just moving closer. Again, thanks to efference copies. CCing instructions to different parts of your body produces this comfortably fixed and predictable world. But what happens when we compensate our vision without sending instructions to the muscles? This deliberate miscommunication gives us a mind's eye. Try looking at an object in the room. Use your imagination to pick it up. Rotate it in the air. Look underneath. Now imagine a dinosaur coming smashing through the wall and breaking the object to pieces with its teeth and claws. I bet you can recall the tune of Somewhere Over the Rainbow while you're witnessing this carnage. Layers on layers. Some are real, some are simulated. It's a wonder people ever get bored. As you have just witnessed, hijacking efference not only gives us inner thoughts and images and sounds, but also inner speech. Planning to say things without instructing the mouth and vocal folds gives rise to our inner monologue. How different would our experience of the world be if we lost that ability to have a conversation with ourselves in our mind? By forfeiting the opportunity to partition our senses and optimize their roles, like pigeons, we can broadcast integrated information across the entire brain and acquire some awesome new abilities. With inner speech and sight, we can generate complex ideas, come up with plans, manipulate the world, and project the likely consequences of our actions, all inside a safe, virtual testing laboratory. What's more, we can have thoughts about our thoughts. We can ask ourselves why we feel the way that we do, and exercise self-control. Well, some people can. Humans each carry a mental sandbox for free private investigations. I'll take that over echolocation any day. As usual, great complexity creates great confusion. Plying our perceptions with fake news exposes us to cognitive biases, self-deception, and delusion. These are standard features of human life, but so is chaos. To combat this, I can make deliberate changes to my surroundings now, and then act on them later. Think of an ant laying a scent trail to find its way home. It alters its environment in the present to guide its behavior in the future. Humans do this to a much more sophisticated degree. By sticking post-it notes all over my computer screen on a Friday afternoon, I'll remember who I need to call on Monday morning. I am ever the optimist. In a very real way, scent marks and post-it notes have become a form of external memory, like regular spoken communication, but between time-lapsed versions of yourself rather than between individuals. And unlike an inner monologue, these communications are publicly available. They can be accidentally or intentionally intercepted. And this is what I realized when I was a student. It suddenly occurred to me that those anonymous words that were written on my bedroom wall sent me down a rabbit hole of thinking. The ideas contained within altered my behavior, consciously or unconsciously, and began an incremental change in my life. If I hadn't read those words and comprehended their meaning, I wouldn't have had conversations about it, and I wouldn't be recording this podcast. When nervous systems first evolved, cells could share information and coordinate action at a distance. Today, our perceptions are awash with messages left by other people. The environment itself has been repurposed to broadcast information and steer human actions. Think of road signs, voicemails, advertisements, alarm clocks, treasure maps, barbed wire fences, and a flatmate's passive-aggressively putting the recycling by the front door where you won't miss it. The visual, audible, and written media produced by humanity has introduced a collective, intrasubjective, external nervous system that screams louder than the background of reality itself. And once you start to notice them, these community reafference copies appear everywhere. Oh, and in case you were wondering, before I checked out of that student accommodation, I too felt compelled to jot an additional grandiose claim on the communal wall. If it's still there today, you will find a quote from Stephen Fry. "The only reason people do not know much is because they do not care to know. They are incurious. Incuriosity is the oddest and most foolish failing there is." End quote. I wonder if writing that, or recording it again now, will alter someone's life in some way. If you, like me, cannot help but think of an ice-skating hippopotamus whenever someone mentions those words, then you too are vulnerable to having your thoughts hijacked. But to what extent are your actions also under external control? The next episode on free will have all of those answers, assuming you choose to listen to it.